Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good evening to you all. My name is Hassan Kamal Wattoo. I'm a lawyer and columnist based here in Islamabad. Since the introductions have been made, I believe we can just dive straight into our conversation. But before we do so, perhaps I could provide some context. As many of you may know, in the rapidly advancing technological advancements of today, we've seen on a daily basis the new advancements in technology mean that artificial intelligence takes the work that was being done previously by human beings is now being done within a few seconds by machines. With every day, human beings are being made redundant, and the machines and machine learning algorithms are taking over those jobs. As we may know, ladies and gentlemen, many of these advancements in technology, the legal field is no exception to those. And as authors like Yuval Noah Harari put it, within a matter of at least even a decade or a few years, these professions in their entirety may be made redundant. Now, I don't mean to put the panel here or audience into any fears, but just to be prepared for that, we have a panel here that is consisted of thought leaders in that regard. So to guide us through these challenges and to prepare us for those, I'll first introduce the panelists, Mr. Altaf Qureshi, Mr. Sadia Khan, Ms. Sadia Khan, and Mr. Faisal Aftab. And my first question will be to Mr. Faisal Aftab. So you've been an early investor in several successful startups and have clearly succeeded in predicting the future on that front. What future do you see for law, and why is it incumbent upon us to digitalize the legal institutions of Pakistan?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here. It's truly a pleasure. In order to understand the changes that are taking place in law, along with the entire overall system, I think it's very important to kind of set a context in place, especially from a global macro perspective. So I'll start it off in the actual disruption that we're in, which is the fundamental core of what's driving even the fuel prices in Pakistan, or what's even driving the US-Russia conflict and geopolitics around us. We're in the exchange of value disruption, which is effectively money merging with the internet. That particular change is so profound that it impacts every aspect of the way we live, because money is pretty much, even today the electricity is running as we're sitting in this forum. So it impacts us in every capacity. And that exchange of value disruption eventually will have an impact on, in terms of AI, when you talk about settlements of transactions. All of this will play out over the next 10 years. The reason why you're seeing technology accelerate at such a rapid pace is that just like the industrial age had disrupted the agrarian age, which was the landed class, the same thing is taking place today, where the technologist or the information age has actually already disrupted the industrialist age, or industrialization, the industrial age altogether. And as we move forward, you're going to see the pace and velocity increase more and more. So coming to law, the way you have to look at this is that anything that is logic-based, whether it's lawyers, accountants, or even OPD doctors, most of these professions will not exist. And when I say that, it's not going to be 20 years. By 2030, I don't think we'll need probably 70 to 80% less lawyers that, compared to what exists today, because AI will be able to put together a motion in literally 30 seconds by using historical case laws. And I'm talking about very baseline motions that you're submitting, that you generally submit. And lawyers would take 40 hours just to kind of read and research. It's already happening on Wall Street. When you look at it today, about 90% of trades are being done by algorithms, and they're much faster than most hedge funds are actually becoming obsolete. And so the same logic is going to play out in that profession as well. So now obviously there's precursors to that before we get to that stage, and a lot of that is data driven. So a lot of the projects that you've seen, including Vakil Online and many others that are trying to aggregate case law as well, a lot of this stuff first has to become symmetric, put into databases, and then based on that you can have algorithms that are written that can utilize that data. So it's a gradual journey, and if we don't take action in Pakistan to actually address this and start to harness this power, you will see foreign law firms actually step in. And as Mr. Huzaim Pansota identified in Karachi, aptly so, is that effectively will just turn into a rubber stamp. Local lawyers will just kind of be that, filing fee component of it. So what he had shared was that a lot of foreign law firms historically would reach out for local cases. Now many of them have such strong AIs in place that they've already written the motion and they literally just send it over for the local law firm to file it. So that should kind of give you the initial signs of the disruption, and it happens initially gradually, then it accelerates, and then suddenly it disrupts. So I wouldn't put it past, I wouldn't put this in the back burner. This is not 20 years away. This is literally 5 years and then 10 years away.
Right. So just to involve Ms. Sadia in the conversation, as we've seen when it comes to technological innovations that are disrupting industries and that are bringing in new challenges, new progressions that are unprecedented in the history of that country, a major role is that of the regulator. So as the regulator, what is your view in the SECP of the challenges and how you're going to go about making a conducive environment for such startups to flourish in Pakistan without any unnecessary obstacles?
Thank you, Ahsan. Okay. First of all, the objective of the SECP is to beneficially regulate. And as such, it has no choice but to not only be receptive to change, but to proactively encourage it. Now, a lot of the presentation made this morning, by the way, I'm very impressed with everything that's happening in the legal fraternity, but nobody spoke about the ecosystem that has enabled those innovations to come about. The ecosystem, high teledensity, high internet penetration, the ability to make digital online payments, all these have been facilitated by some regulator or the other. So what is the SSCP doing in this regulatory domain? We are the only regulator in the country which has actively propagated the idea of a regulatory sandbox. A regulatory sandbox is where new ideas, new products, new services, new business models are tested in a limited scale environment. And this gives the opportunity to the new innovations to not only test their products and to tweak it in response to the market needs, but also provides an opportunity to the regulator to study it and try and come up with a regulatory response. So we are right now in our third cohort, just starting the third cohort of our regulatory sandbox. And the first two cohorts, ideas such as peer-to-peer lending, crowdfunding, digital insurance, parametric insurance, robo-advisory, all these products have been tested. And now we have come up with a regulatory response in terms of the changes in the requisite laws and regulations, be it the NBFC regulation, be it the insurance law. So all these are in the works. Now, some may argue that it takes a while, but you have to understand that the rules and regulations have to be made after due consultation. And we have to make sure that the requisite checks and balances are in there to look after the interests of all the stakeholders. So while we've been very proactive, we've got the regulatory sandbox, we are putting out concept papers on new asset fractionalization, for example, more digital products. Some of the changes have to come at a later stage when we have done the necessary consultations from the market.
Right, so moving on to Mr. Altaf Qureshi. Sir, as an early adopter of legal technology in Pakistan, you've seen this industry grow from its infancy into where it is today. How far do you think it's come? How far is it going? And what are going to be the major roadblocks on the way to that?
Thank you. Thank you, Hassan. Is this on? So how far have we come along? In my mind, not far enough. We need to move much further and much faster in terms of actual substance. So taking Faisal's point, how much data is actually digitized? How much data is actually even accessible? Until we don't have all of these components, we can't run where we're barely walking. Is there a strong potential and a strong future? Absolutely. What are the obstacles? Well, I mean, let's be very specific about Pakistan. The number one obstacle is mindset. And that is people who are not prepared for the change, but are also fearful of not being involved in that changing environment. So they try to position themselves, they try to make the best of their situation. But I always think back to a very simple sort of observation that was made to me, that in future there'll only be two types of people. One who tells the computer what to do, and the other one who is told by the computer what to do. So in order to get ahead of this, you need to understand how not only computers work, not only how technology works, but you need to also be in a position to manipulate that, to use that for your own advantage, which will actually improve the ecosystem, which will actually improve the profession. Let me just give one example. Since legal tech has grown mostly, let's say, in the UK or the US, Canada, I mean, even parts of Europe has barely touched legal tech. Asia is just about taking off. There are actually more lawyers in the world, not less. Because the sophistication of what you're doing, the volume at what you're doing, has only meant that even human resource has increased with it. So if today I'm a young lawyer in any major city in the world, what my law firm employer does what my law firm employer actually does is pay for me to learn how to code. So, we have our Wahjoc brother here who want to stay within the confines of their courts and their chambers and their colleagues, whereas your compatriots around the world, including overseas Pakistanis, are actually learning how to code multiple pieces of software. So how competitive are you going to be? And if Pakistan catches up with the race on data, so we have tons of data, by the way, in Pakistan. What we don't have is access to it. No one gives you access. And the ones who have data don't share it with the others who even have their data. So we like our silos. Until these things are broken down, forget legal tech, hardly much tech is going to progress. Everybody's going around building their own data. And that, I fear, is much more damaging than patting ourselves on the back that we're actually getting further down the line.
Right, so that's a brilliant point, and I think the sentiment is shared among the Wahjoc Brotherhood as well, that there's a great need to innovate. That brings me to Mr. Faisal, which, as we know, there's been a recent startup wave in Pakistan, and multiple startups have been getting millions of dollars in funding. We've seen on an international level that wave has extended to legal startups as well, legal technology. But for some reason or another in Pakistan, that inclusion of the legal space has been missing. Is there any particular reason you see for this, and any roadmap you have in mind to address this gap?
Yeah, so investments are really linked to timing in terms of when it's the right time to actually invest in a particular vertical. So I think legal tech is going to have its day, and I think you're seeing the actual momentum. This is actually the starting point of the legal tech industry. Just like health tech and ed tech, there have been attempts for several years. And there's still no clear-cut leader that's really emerging and scaling. But if you notice, more and more investments are coming both in health tech and in ed tech. So I think we're probably a couple of years away from serious big checks start to enter the legal tech space. As I mentioned earlier, it's always an evolution process. And so there's components of basically the access to existing case law, how easy it is to access and use to effectively enhance the legal tech platforms, and then how do you monetize them? That's the second component of this. And I think as we move forward with all these different platforms doing their bits and pieces within this legal tech ecosystem, eventually you'll see some sort of collaboration come in, and that's the beauty of disruption. It's not that easy to predict, and then somebody will be a leader and will get backed, and then you'll just see a ton of money unlocked for this particular vertical.
Right, so is that a khushkhabri you're willing to give out today? The ton of money is coming to the legal tech space very soon.
Absolutely. I think every industry that can be digitized is going to be digitized, and there's only so many times you can invest in B2B plays in the FMCG space or fintechs trying to disrupt the banking layer. Eventually this industry is going to be disrupted. So I'm certain on this.
Brilliant. That brings me to Ms. Sadia. You have been successful in digitizing at least one industry. SCCP has undergone very successful digitalization recently. As someone who's been successful in digitizing one sector, what roadblocks perhaps did you face, and what does that position give you to perhaps give some guidelines to the legal space as it attempts to digitize its, for example, the court system, the case system, the roadblocks, the hindrances, the naysayers? How would you get over those hindrances in digitizing an institution and doing it for the better?
So Ahsan, thank you for that question. I was really excited to hear Honorable Justice Syed Mansoor Ali Shah talk about his roadmap, because all the components that he mentioned in terms of workflow management, in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of the delays being cut down, those are all the aspects that we've been working on to improve within the SCCP itself. We have a comprehensive program in place called the LEAP, for leading efficiency through automation prowess. And all these elements are really geared towards achieving objectives, which is enhancing user experience, increasing the efficiency of our internal operations, as well as promoting transparency and accountability. And a lot of these components I spoke about are in the process or have been implemented as well. And let me just give you one example and the kind of outcomes we've achieved. So those who have incorporated companies, I'm sure many of you who have helped incorporate companies, in the past there was manual filing, then you had to go to the bank, put your challan in, and then you would come back, receive a physical certificate of incorporation, and then go to various branches of government to whether it's APR, EOBI, or the rest, and then for opening the bank account as well, a whole separate process, come back to the CRO, get your statements authenticated and take them back. Now it's a one-stop shop. So it's all automated. The filing is online. The challan is paid for online. The certificate is a digital copy that you receive. No need for verification authentication. We have a bank portal where the banks have access to real-time statements submitted by the companies, so that the immediate opening of accounts is available. We also have an integrated platform with FBR and EOBI, so any new company registering with us automatically get registered with them. So this is just a one-stop shop and an example of how we can enhance efficiency and promote transparency by reducing the manual labor in the process. As a result, you've probably seen in the newspapers the number of incorporations that have gone up. In the past, there were about 8,000 companies newly incorporated per year. In the last 2 years, it's upward of 20,000 new companies per year. So this is not only enhancing the level of economic activity in the country, but also increasing the formalization of the economy, which is in our interest. So there's a long way to go, but we are on our way to that complete end-to-end digitization, which will hopefully achieve dividends for all our regulated sectors.
Right, that brings me to my next question to Mr. Altaf. Sir, somebody working in the legal technology space, somebody in a startup in general, one would imagine that a great friend and a foe is the investor and the regulator. So as someone with one sitting on your left and right, is there anything you would like to, any message you would like to give to investors and regulators on perhaps what the betterments are to bring and what perhaps the steps forward ought to be for creating the most conducive environment possible for initiatives like yours to succeed?
I feel like the goat that's about to be slaughtered. Yeah, friend and foe. So, with respect to the regulators, I have a recommendation, I have a piece of advice, but I also have an observation which may not be considered, polite, let's put it that way, so my apologies in advance. But basically, my biggest competitor as a legal tech player is the government itself. So the government, rather than building policies and regulations and enabling an environment, it usually creates the app, creates the service, creates the very thing that a commercial sector player is ultimately trying to deliver. Now, for example, yes, I completely agree. 8,000 companies became 20,000. But why not 200,000? And there's only one way you can do that. You have to decentralize, which means that SECP needs to have APIs. And if APIs exist, then you can have 10,000 firms that are connected digitally to create 200,000 companies. But that would mean that the regulator needs to let go. Not just create the environment, but actually step back from it. And I very much want to see this. I know a lot of my colleagues want to see this. Yes, there are many advancements that SECP has made, even the State Bank and the FPR and whatever. But there's a difference. Your KPIs are for the regulator. My KPIs are different. The economy's KPIs are different. And that can only be achieved if that works together. When it comes to investors, look, I don't think there's a faux element there at all. I'm not going to go that far, so don't worry. But I appreciate that we are a later stage industry for investment purposes. I remember reading something that really hit home with me, which is that in technology, there's no innovation. Okay, technology already exists. It has the legal tech space is using technology that in theory was invented in the 1960s or 70s. Okay, so we're only just deploying it in 2020s. Okay, the real innovation is the business model, the monetization of data, the monetization of your service. So if people want to be innovative in Pakistan, they need to think, how will this be sustainable? And one of the key reasons why I'm in legal tech is because it's called B2B SaaS, B2B software as a service. We are inherently profitable. We provide a service that is less the cost of delivery and higher at the price point. Whereas a lot of the B2C elements that you see in investor focus is subsidized. So you need money to keep the business going. And I perfectly understand that why, but I'm hoping for the day that we enter a B2B space for SaaS purposes, because that's globally where the largest amount of investment comes. But for that, we have a problem. Pakistan is not seen as a country that can compete globally for B2B SaaS. Even India is just entering this space. But do I believe there's lack of talent here? Absolutely not. There's tons of talent. And the perfect example of this are the 400,000 freelancers who make far more money today than they do in a job. So could they all become B2B SaaS players? Absolutely. For that, we need to attract the investor audience to us and create that marriage between what the investors want to see and what the locals are capable of delivering.
Faisal sir, would you like to comment on how Pakistan can compete on that international level, especially in the context of rising developments, and perhaps how the particular developments in law with, as we mentioned earlier, with, as we've seen in several international law firms, entire areas of work which were previously done by associates are now solely done by machine learning algorithms, and it's come to the point where several law firms have policies wherein a document can't be seen by the eyes of a client until it goes through an artificial intelligence checker. Now, do you think that obviously Pakistan is nowhere near, we've spoken that to in length already, reaching that level wherein we create a conducive environment, but how can we move forward to convince the policymakers and create a conducive environment wherein we can compete on an international level to bring Pakistan to that level?
Yeah, so I feel like the market is so big in Pakistan that we don't really need to compete at an international level if we just look inwards. I think the official estimates are as the informal, since we're talking about potential defaults and bankruptcy, let's put things in context. This is probably $1 trillion economy today, but in the financialized measurement system, it's a $300 billion economy that's effectively 70% debt to GDP, whereas the reserve currency is the dollar. They're at 150% debt to GDP on external basis. The math doesn't add up in the financialized system as far as I'm concerned, right? So the underlying assets are there. So we undervalue ourselves because we don't look inward to see the actual quality of the people in this country. Now, I have to be true to many things that our academic system is lagging as an investor. And so if I were to say AI and robotics and those type of fields, it's not going to be easy for us to compete where research funding and grants in China, Europe, and the US, they're just eons ahead in effectively those type of plays. But where we will have lots of strength, and we're a very populous country, so it's the human resource element. So one of the main things, it's not just about artificial intelligence, it's also about outsourcing. So as we've seen, the freelance community has actually made millions of dollars, billions in fact. I think the average programmer now is making on average $15,000 to $20,000 a month. They're not even earning rupees anymore. So this, in the same way in the legal profession, we probably can have lots of outsourcing setups where basically the human resource is used by law firms abroad where billable hours are very different, and so you use that labor arbitrage to your advantage over the next few years. So I think that's a huge potential. In terms of the software development layer, that's another one which is already happening on the freelance side. I think that can also be done on the legal tech sides, because you always need a legal lawyer's input and more lawyers that learn coding, which I didn't think existed in Pakistan. And after attending this conference, I've discovered it wasn't just one or two. Quite a few of them have actually learned coding on the side, so that's great. So I think that's another layer that as more and more young lawyers that are graduating start to realize that the industry is shifting, they'll start moving in that direction. So I think really we should look from that point of view versus trying to develop a platform that will conquer internationally. I just don't see that happening from Pakistan. Maybe regionally, possibly, in countries that have similar laws. Obviously everything changes from territory to territory. So we've seen a lot of Pakistani platforms successfully enter the GCC countries or the North African countries, and even on the Bangladesh and South Asia side. So, something to consider.
Right. So with that, since we're unfortunately running out of time, I'd like to pose the last question to the entire panel. Please feel free to jump in if you have anything to contribute. As we all know, of course, the dream of a digital legal Pakistan is something that most of us in this room would share. But the hindrances often fall upon deaf ears. We don't find audiences wherein we can communicate to the policy makers, the people in charge who are creating those decisions and are in the position to create a conducive environment or the lack thereof for that digital legal Pakistan to flourish. So if there's any one thing you could say to those policymakers, any single decision, any mindset, any change in paradigms that could allow for that conducive environment to be made, what would it be? Please, anyone in the panel, please feel free to jump in.
I can start. I think having a proactive approach and being receptive to change, and also don't underestimate the power of synergy. I think there's power in collaborating and working together, and only when all stakeholders unite can we achieve outcomes that are truly sustainable. And I think that's why it's important to have these open discussions and make sure that we understand each other's perspective. And with that, I mean, just a quick comment on how we could open it up to even a greater number of incorporations. The role of the regulator, look, ease of doing business has two sides. One is, of course, we want the market to develop. We want to reduce the barriers to entry. We want to reduce the compliance costs. But at the same time, we have to protect the rights of the stakeholders, the shareholders, the small policy holders. And just to give an example, the number of tech enabled services, the number of companies is mushrooming, but at the same time we hear of cases where there is illegal deposit taking happening from various platforms. So we do need to check on these malpractices as well, where it's not legally allowed. So it's a fine balance that the regulator has to maintain between promoting the industry and making sure that malpractices don't flourish, which are to the detriment of the smaller investors and shareholders.
Thank you. Would like to add anything?
No. Thank you. So the question is, how do we move forward? What advice do we give policymakers?
Exactly. Any single piece of advice to the policymakers on that?
I think I go back to the original position on mindset. Now, so I'm also a British Pakistani, so I could open this startup in London, or if I'm very lucky, I could open it in Silicon Valley because I raise money there. What is the key difference? The key difference is I'm not being prevented from doing it in the first place. I'm allowed to do whatever I want. But if I do breach laws, breach regulations, I will see enforcement hit me very hard. So I am regulated from that perspective. But the sense of getting permission, getting consent, getting access, that actually isn't in the environment. The environment is already open. It's just for me to take advantage of. In my capacity as a lawyer, I've had this conversation with the SECP and the State Bank, etc., is that we need to shift our mindset away from regulating, which is opening the door, to just enforcing. Now, it is a concern. I completely agree. There are cases of fraud, there are cases of money laundering, illegal activity happens. More often than not in the informal sector. So the sector we're not even actually looking at properly. But if we are going to look at the formal sector, I'd rather have 2 million firms out in the market playing and we capture the 2,000 that are bad, rather than having only 20,000 firms because we're individually allowing them to come into the market. So the mindset that has to shift is, let's not regulate entrance. Let's just capture the guys who actually do it wrong when they do it.
Thank you. Please, would you like to add anything?
So building on the same thing, I mean, I would say that it's the mindset change in Pakistan is reactive. and all regulators, not SECP, actually you guys are one of the better ones, but I'll go back to history of disruption and how the regulators have reacted. So, you don't want to be Pembra to YouTube and Netflix, where you're regulating Pakistani channels, but effectively you have no control on Netflix and YouTube. You don't want to be PTA to WhatsApp and Skype, where you're again regulating local communication, and you have no control on WhatsApp or Skype. And I think you don't want to be State Bank and get disrupted by DeFi, which will come, and it'll come aggressively. Blockchain is being taken as just the way Netflix and YouTube are being taken. And these are not just random internet. This is not just random internet money. It is eventually going to become central bank digital currencies that will be used as a new form of monetary policy. And the reason why I bring that up is, again, the mind shift has to occur as we move from a financialized global economy that has existed from the 1970s onward to a tokenized global economy. Probably we actually can accelerate because adoption can be a lot quicker. And if we harness this tokenized economy, which allows traceability and documentation by default, as money digitizes, everything is traceable. So leveraging all these things versus trying to use old tactics and coming up with a new strategy is extremely important.
Hello? Yeah, this is still...
You can finish your PowerPoint, please.
Yeah, this was like Will Smith's speech. So, no, it's... so, I'll just leave it off with this, that, in Pakistan, there's no concept of coordination or even long-term thinking. It did not take a genius to realize that we were going to have global inflation on the planet this 2022. I was actually in conferences last year saying that next year is going to be strong dollar, strong oil. Now, this is not rocket science. The US Fed, which is the reserve currency, is saying, hey, we're going to raise rates. That means the dollar gets stronger, the rupee gets weaker. And because we're in an inflationary cycle, oil is also going up. Strong oil, strong dollar causes decimation to frontier market currencies. We could have planned this a lot better had we just thought beyond 3 months. Most countries try to think at a 3 to 5 year basis, and that's our perpetual problem. So I think that entire mindset has to shift. Start coming up with 5, 10, 15-year plans, and we'll actually probably win this game.
Right. With that, thank you very much.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure, we're absolutely running out of time, so if you could sum it up very quickly.
Very quickly, because I think the lawyers will appreciate this. Waqar Zaka's petition at the Sindh High Court under Justice K.K. Agha requesting the regulation of cryptocurrencies in Pakistan. And the authorities all said, sorry, we can't regulate, we're going to ban it. Justice K.K. Agha did the perfect thing. He said, sorry, no, I'm not going to allow you to ban it. You have to find a way to regulate it. And so they've had to go back to the drawing board to find a way to regulate it. This is the kind of mindset shift we need. This is how DeFi will happen.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Thank you to all three of our panelists, and may the dream of a digital legal Pakistan become a reality. Thank you.